I'm Stephen Shakespeare. I'm here representing the minor part of the good right, along with Tim. When I first found out we were meeting here, I thought, what kind of a lunatic would drag people all the way from Manchester, all the way out here, just to be in front of this absurd sight of Manchester United behind us. Then, of course, I realised, those of you who have an interest in football will know that Arsenal slaughtered Manchester United tonight. And it gives me great pleasure, therefore, to be here tonight in front of that sign and have a good laugh about it. It is a great place to have this event, and I'm very grateful for Legatum for supporting this event. Can I say that when Tim and I discussed who we would invite to speak, we thought of all the people that have contributed most to the theme that we were interested in, and the list had the four people at the very top who we in fact have here tonight. In other words, with the first four people, normally you approach lots of people say no, and you find people further down the list. These are the four people that we wanted here tonight, and they are the very top choices for exemplifying what the good right is about. There's Ruth Davidson. Those of you who read her article, which will probably be most of you in Con Home earlier, will know said very eloquently how it was to appeal to and to help the people, to care about the people who are most vulnerable, the poor at the bottom. That's her reason for being in politics. Ian Duncan Smith, who is the person who brought social justice back into the conservative vocabulary, founding the Centre for Social Justice and exemplifying that in his entire career. We have Sajid Javid, whose life story exemplifies the story we want to tell, but also, not just the story, but is a real, someone who thinks about the engineering of government and how you achieve things, which is very much a part of of our narrative, and I'll say a bit more about that. And of course Michael Gove, who whose revolutionary zeal showed that you can be in government and actually achieve these things. They're not just messages, they're things that you can actually make happen. Now, we're at a very important moment, I think, in the history of the Conservative Party, because somewhat surprisingly we've just won an election. At least it was a surprise to me. Unfortunately, but we won an election, and we shouldn't misunderstand that victory. It was a great victory, but it was also not a victory that we won because people loved us or admired us or above all trust us. I think they still don't. They still view us as the party of the rich. And when the Labour Party, when the Labour government came in 97, they achieved something very important that they can fall back on even in their bad times now, which is that they added to their repertory of being the party of the poor, of all people, of the common man and so forth. They added economic competence, a reputation that at least they can in fact run an economy well. And I think it's important that the Conservative Party is not only has the right ideas for government, the right ideas for policy, but shows that it does care about all the people, that it does embrace social justice, and this is a massive opportunity to do precisely that. And that is what the four people that we have here are exemplifying. That is what we're going to hear about in a moment. Just to say that there's an event coming soon on November the 4th when George Osborne will be launching Tim Montgomery's important new text on capitalism and how capitalism can be made to work for the poor and vulnerable. That's going to be on November the 4th. Again, something very much supported by Legatum. Thank you very much to Legatum. Thank you very much for you all here. And I'd like to hand over to the Manchester United supporter and otherwise wonderful human being, Tim Montgomery.
This all seems such a good idea. This afternoon room and I was sat with Stephen Shakespeare as goal went in after goal. It didn't seem such a good idea. Just before I invite our panellists up to speak, can I just draw your attention to defeating poverty, the hashtag. This is all on the record tonight, and we'd love for you who are on Twitter to record what's being said and get a little bit of buzz out there to put out the message that Conservatives are talking about, the issues that we're talking about tonight. So, without further delay, I'd like to call our four speakers up to the stage. First of all, the Secretary of State for Justice, Michael Gove. My friend from University Days, Sajid Javid, the Secretary of State for Business. The leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson. Thank you, Ruth. And last but certainly not least, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Ian Duncan-Smith. So I'm going to try and encourage our speakers to be as brief as possible. I've got 10 questions on my list, and it would be great if we can get through most of them in the time. So they're not aware, but there are trap doors underneath this stage, and at any moment I could press the button and they will disappear. But I'm going to start with a sort of a very broad question, and I'm going to put it to Sajid first, if I may, Sajid. And that first question is this, the time that we live in, the greatest time to be alive? Not particularly at the moment after Manchester United's defeat, but generally.
First of all, thanks for inviting me, and thanks to Legatum for sponsoring this and all the work that Good Right does, especially in showing that conservatism is a lot more than pounds and pence and cents. I think it's a really important message. Is this the greatest time? I think we're very, very fortunate to live in this time, and one of the reasons I'd say that is because capitalism has won the battle of ideas. And so between 1970 and 2010, we have seen a reduction in the number of people around the world that live on $1 a day or less fall by 80%. And it wasn't the IMF that did that, or the UN, or the World Bank, or even international aid. It was because of the spread of capitalism. And we've been lucky enough to see that happen during our lifetimes. I don't pretend it's got the answers to all our challenges, of course not, but there is no better system, and I think that's one of the reasons we're lucky to be alive now.
Fantastic. And you may applaud at any time if you have a particularly good answer. But I would say, if you do applaud, we'll have less time for hear their answers. So may you just make quick applause. Ruth Davidson.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sajid's right in terms of the measurables. So things like infant mortality is down, the number of people in extreme poverty around the world is down. But for me, I think the best time to be alive is, and in different places, is probably at the time where there's the biggest spark of hope. So whether that is, Columbus landing in the New World, right the way through to things that are happening right now. I think the biggest regret I have is that I'm maybe not 5 or 6 or 7 years older, that I wasn't alive and politically conscious and watching the news and all the rest of it at the time that the Berlin Wall came down, and there was this big, massive shift. And I remember being allowed to stay up late because it was the 9th of November, it was the night before my 10th birthday, and I knew that something was happening, and I knew it was big and it was exciting, but I wish I'd been just that little bit older that I could have understood it. Because I work beside and have some tremendous people working in my team that have come from states that were from behind the Iron Curtain. And I think just that absolute spark of hope must have been just the most tremendous, life-affirming, hopeful time to be alive. And I hope that we see things like that again. I hope very much that we see it, for example, in North Korea. And at that point and at that moment in the world, that will be the very best time to be alive.
Fantastic answer. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Well, thanks a lot. Cheers. That's my mum. It's not really.
Don't worry, we won't get any.
Were you old enough to see the Berlin Wall fall down?
I don't remember it. Actually, I wasn't in Berlin. I was in another German city, and it was quite interesting what was going on there. But I wasn't actually. I was going to say I agree. Actually, you can almost take this everywhere you like. But I think the measure for this, for me, and I agree with Sajid, that the advance of capitalism bringing more wealth, spreading more wealth is critical. I also agree that the key test, and I think Ruth's on one important feature, which is the only way to answer this question is what is the time that you feel that you were most tested and not found wanting? And I just think we are 75 years since a moment in British history when this country stood alone against the tyranny and foul filth of Nazism. And had we not done so, had those pilots, etc., not defeated the Germans, we would none of us today be sitting in this position to discuss how good things are today. So if you want my answer to that, the greatest time this country has ever faced is in that year from 40 to 41, when alone we showed what decency, tolerance and democracy stood for, and we put our lives on the line for it. And I think that was the critical moment.
I hope the Winston Churchill table over there was particularly appreciative of that moment. Secretary of State for Justice, Michael Gove.
Well, I have to be honest, I'm a bit of a reactionary. There were undoubtedly some things that were better in the past, because it was in the past that England used to qualify beyond the group stages of the Rugby World Cup. It was in the distant past in our history that Scotland used to qualify for the World Cup at all. And of course it was in the past that Alex Ferguson was managing Aberdeen Football Club when he actually managed to hit the heights. I don't know what happened to his career after that. So there are some moments that you can cherish from the past, look back on and say that those were special days. But actually, if one looks objectively, free of the film of sentiment, at the time in which we live now, it is the best time in the world to be alive. There's never been a better time to be a woman in the world than today. There are opportunities that women enjoy which for centuries were denied them. And the prejudice that held 51% of the population back, and which still holds them back in parts of the world, and indeed parts of our own society, has crumbled. It's the best time in the world, actually, to be a believer. There are more countries which are open to those who have faith and conviction and give them the chance to worship and to contribute in the way in which they believe is important, more than at any time in human history. It's the best time in the world to be creative. There are more opportunities, thanks to the liberating power of technology, for people to write, to compose, to create, to make a contribution. And I think it's also the best time in the world to raise children. I think for those of us who are reflecting on the opportunities available to our sons and daughters now, we know that they're limitless and that technology and, as Sajid has said, free markets have liberated them from so many of the constraints that they laboured under in the past. Now, of course, there are challenges, and we're going to go on to discuss some of those challenges that this particular new set of circumstances offer. But I think that we've got to be honest, that while every Conservative has a little bit of him or her that looks back and sees in our traditions and in our past something to cherish and something that shouldn't be eclipsed, it's also the case that we, thanks to the energy and creativity of individuals across the globe, are now living in the best time ever to be a human being.
I'm going to stick with you, Michael, if I may, for our next question. The bishops of Liverpool of old, during the Thatcher years, wrote a book called Bias to the Poor. Do you think, as the Secretary of State for Education, who introduced a lot of reforms, such as the pupil premium, bias towards children in disadvantaged communities, should there be that bias towards the disadvantaged at the heart of public policy?
Absolutely. The whole point of government is to redress the balance. There are some individuals who find themselves automatically through no fault of their own, growing up in homes and in circumstances where their opportunity to contribute is undermined by those circumstances, and we need to be on their side. If there are people who grow up in homes where there isn't the love and the affection and the stability that almost everyone in this room will have enjoyed, then their lives are blighted from the beginning and they're handicapped in the race of life. If there are individuals who later on in life suffer catastrophic events, whether that's the onset of mental illness or an economic shock that their particular part of the world hasn't been insulated from, then we should be on their side, because we, I think all of us on this panel, recognise that there is a unique ability that every individual has to produce something special in their lives. And if we manage to nurture whatever it is that is special in every individual, then all of us lead more blessed lives. And so we've got to think, what is it that we can do to help those who, through no fault of their own, or sometimes even because they've made mistakes and they deserve a second chance, whom we can help in order to be bigger, better contributors to a healthy society.
In your recent prison speech, you quoted Winston Churchill about finding the treasure within every human being, which is what you were just saying, I think.
Yes, I completely agree. I don't think that you can... it's wrong to write anyone off. Everyone deserves to have another opportunity. And one of the things about prison is that, of course, prison is there for people who have committed offences and who've crossed a line, and we need to have a clear line between right and wrong in order to uphold a civilised society. But we shouldn't determine someone's life purely on the basis of one decision that they've made. We shouldn't judge someone on their worst moments. And so, therefore, we shouldn't think of people as offenders. We should think of them as individuals who've got something to offer.
Ian. Ian, when we were setting up the Centre for Social Justice together, one of your priorities, one of the things I know that always made you angry, was the waste of human talent for the unemployment and dependency. I don't need to answer the question, really. You absolutely believe there should be a bias to the vulnerable in public policy.
Well, I do. I completely agree with what Michael said. In fact, the phrase that people shouldn't be written off, I think, is an important one. I think the idea of the second chance, if you remember, a while, many years ago, we launched this whole idea of the second chance. And that started the process of looking at prisons and looking at giving people proper rehabilitation. Getting to kids before they do their second stint in prison means they're less likely to go on to have a career in prison. So that's absolutely vital. But underlying it all is also saying, look, it isn't the state that can deliver all of this stuff. What you've actually got to recognise, if we talked earlier on about the importance of capitalism and the free markets, it's because they do the best redistribution of opportunity. States are not good with opportunity, but the markets are. And what we have to make sure, therefore, is that we don't leave things in the way of people being able to take those choices. They need to be able to get that employment. Otherwise, they can't simply rise out of their condition. As we know, a working family, a family that gets the opportunity to see their parent or parents go out to work to get a job, has a different sense to them. They have a sense of pride. They have a sense of self-worth. They get to believe that this is the way you live your life, that there is a structure to life which gives you an opportunity. They perform better at school because that sense of self-worth is critical. And one of the things I found often going round into different states and talking to people is quite often the group that faces the biggest problem is often young girls in many of these difficult families. And they grow up witnessing abuse and all sorts of difficulties. They grow up, therefore, without any sense of self-worth, believing that everything they have has to be traded against some other thing that they need to give. And I think this is the key thing. So to get through that process, to allow them to grow, needs their families to grow and structure, and for us to be able to help that, but to make sure that those opportunities arise. So it is ultimately through that process that gives them the structure through work. And I'm really strongly in favour of that.
Ruth?
I absolutely believe that that's what government's for, and I think it goes back to the kind of first principle is that why do you even form governments? Is you club together to do things better that you cannot do alone. And whether that's something from, you can't have, everybody as an individual can't have their own army, and we pay into a public purse in order to keep ourselves safe, or whether it's to do with the fact that we help those who can't help themselves, or who need extra help. And I think that we do recognise that as a society, but I think we need to do more of it. And I think we also need to be looking over the horizon a little bit as well, because our country has changed, and it's changed massively. And I think that the structures that Ian has talked about, family structures of identity, and roles within families as well, and roles within society, have changed hugely. And what I understand, and I appreciate, and I applaud actually, the work that the Centre for Social Justice has done, particularly with young women. I think that over the horizon, the big issue for us is actually young men. And it's young men coming from backgrounds where traditionally they would have gone into heavy manufacturing labour or some other form of sort of strong role model within their community, where they would be the provider within their family, they would be able to house themselves, be able to raise children, they would have that sense of self-worth. And we all know these boys. I went to school in Buckhaven, I went to school with lots of them that came out the other end who'd been told by teachers that there was nothing that they were going to go on and do, and that there wasn't opportunities for them. And I think that some of the work that the UK government is doing, particularly in apprenticeships, is good, but it's not enough. I think that some of the work that we're doing in terms of identifying what the next jobs are is good, but it's not enough, because there are still, I mean, you see them outside every chicken shop on every high street with their tracky bottoms down below the waistline of their pants. I mean, you know exactly the people here who don't see what their future is, and we've not been able to show them a route out of where they come from. And I think that there is a real issue there about building, and it's this idea of self-worth and this idea of becoming more than where you started, the idea of progress, of establishing yourself within your community, establishing yourself and building a family, and using your life as a platform for the life for your children to build on the life of. And I think that that's the really next big challenge that we have in public policy right now, is what do we do with our young men that aren't going to be academic in the future.
I'm conscious you're the only non-Scot on our panel tonight.
McJavid.
Sajid McJavid, what's your answer to the question?
Aye. No, just kidding. If you're not in politics to help the poor and disadvantaged, you shouldn't be in politics. And that applies equally not just to us Conservative politicians on this panel, but I believe actually our political opponents, Labour, Lib Dems, they're all there. They still, their objectives are very similar. They want to help the poor and disadvantaged. I don't doubt that, and I have tremendous respect for that. I think we just disagree on the sort of broad ways in how you can actually do that and make a difference. And that's probably encapsulated by the difference between handouts and hand-ups. And that's what we're rightly very focused on. I think we can do a lot more of that. Michael, when you were in the education department, you focus a lot on changing people's life chances through education. You're a hand up, as has Ian. In my own department now, for example, when it comes to university entrance, we spend a lot of time and effort and money, resources on how do we make it easier for someone from a troubled background or disadvantaged background. So I think it's actually the only reason to be in politics.
Okay, fantastic. I'm conscious that our time is limited and I have quite a lot of questions to get through. So I may not ask every single question to every panellist. And I'm going to start on the next one with you, Ruth.
All right.
And this might be a tricky question, but what poverty measure introduced by a Labour government do you admire? Mention just one, perhaps, that you particularly think they did well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people talk about that great Attlee government, that great reforming government after the war, and quite rightly they look at the building of the NHS and elsewhere. But actually for me, the really big thing was the National Assistance Act, which first codified this idea that we look after those who are unable to pay into the system. So it was specifically designed for people who weren't involved in the national insurance. So it was for single mothers, it was for people with physical disabilities, it was for people with homeless, and it also empowered local authorities, and it charged them with making sure that there was accommodation for people who didn't have it. It made sure that there was that social safety net in our communities, in every community, and it charged at a community level to do it. And it was the biggest reform since the Poor Laws from Elizabeth I. And I think that was probably one of the biggest single acts that the Labour Party did in that amazing reforming post-war government that they had, that made a huge difference to the most vulnerable in our society.
Sajid?
I would pick the emphasis they put on international aid. Actually, I think they did a lot more than any previous government in terms of promoting international aid. They probably necessarily didn't do it the right way. We've built on that, we've improved it a lot, but I think they were absolutely right to emphasize, as we have done, that if you are one of the richest countries in the world, then you have a moral duty to help the poorest in the world.
Why don't Tories talk very much about the 0.7% aid achievement? Because it was one of the achievements of the last government. And is it slightly buried? Are we slightly embarrassed by it?
Well, let's be not every Tory agrees with that emphasis, and that's probably part of the answer. But I think that actually we are increasingly seeing more and more Tories engage with that agenda. Maybe because most recently, if you look at the migrant crisis, we're able to show, I think, much more clearly the link between soft power and hard power, and I think that's a good way to demonstrate what a real difference to us at home international aid can make as well.
Okay. Michael Gove.
Academy schools.
That's a home match.
Yes, I'm afraid so. But I think that Tony Blair and Andrew Adonis understood that the comprehensive ideal could only work if you did something that people in the Labour Party had never been prepared to do, which was to insist on academic rigour and to avoid making excuses for poor performance in the public sector. And the way in which academy schools, I think, have reinvigorated the comprehensive ideal has meant that we now have a growing number of schools, and they were responsible for the first, which serve their community, which are socially comprehensive, which have high ambitions for their children. I could bore everyone by running through the schools which have been so successful, but some created by Labour, like Mossbaum Community Academy, now send more children to Oxford and Cambridge. That's not the only measure of success, but it's a striking one, than many independent schools. And then there are schools that have been created under the coalition government, which are now outperforming independent schools to the extent that overall our best state schools, as the Daily Telegraph reported earlier this year, now outperform our best independent schools. And that's a victory for comprehensive schooling, not of a kind that Tony Crosland or Shirley Williams would have envisaged, but of a kind that Tony Blair and Andrew Adonis kicked off, and then we've taken forward.
And you wouldn't, by any chance, be mentioning this as a Labour achievement because the current Labour leadership is turning its back on this policy. That wouldn't have entered your head.
Never.
I'm going to ask you a different question, Ian, come to you next. I'm going to give you a magic wand, and you can change anything at all about Britain that you would like to. What would you change? The score this afternoon would be my suggestion, but you probably have something more elevated than that.
Well, I'm a Tottenham man, and who said Harry Kane can't score? He scored an own goal today, so that's, you know. So we're right there. It's not a problem.
And the breaking news, by the way, is Brendan Rodgers has resigned or been sacked or something. I'm not quite sure.
Yes,
So
yes.
there's something to cheer a Man United fan up.
Yeah.
All right, serious now. What's your...
Well, I was ready for the last question, so...
You can answer it if you want to, the last one.
Well, I will answer the last question, actually. I'm thinking about it now. As you asked me. I'd be quite simple, the minimum wage. I actually think, notwithstanding the mess of tax credits, which then ended up depressing it, I do think the whole concept that a job worth doing is worth being paid for it. And I think if people are paid a decent salary, I think the companies will invest in them. I know there are economic purists who will disagree with me completely, I know. I'm looking at the back about this. But I just think the mess was with tax credits, which is a kind of depressing process and kept people on very low income. So I think all in all, I think companies by and large anyway will want to raise their salaries, but I think that was a move in the right direction. I don't really believe much in magic wands, to be quite frank with you.
I don't really have a magic wand, I'm just asking you to imagine.
Yeah, well... I have never understood the unbelievable desire of modern society to want to parade every private aspect of your life in the public view. And I'm afraid maybe that's a generational thing, but I just think if I had a magic wand, I'd like to make people have a default mechanism that says, do I really have to tell everybody about how I went to the loo, who I saw, what I did on Twitter every single day? And those people who think that life is a conspiracy, who spend their life on Twitter, I think maybe they need to find something better to do.
The magic wand
And if everyone could use hashtag defeating poverty when you report that, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
Seeing you've intervened, Ruth, you've got the wand in your hand to change country.
Do you know, one thing I would love to do, I think that I would absolutely love to wave a magic wand and get rid of bigotry and prejudice, because we all in our, our lives, we are at nice events like this and we're sitting at nice tables and we're chatting with all these intelligent people that we've never met before, and some people are pretending to be more intelligent than they are, including people on this panel. We like to think that we're all so sort of terribly okay with everything in the world. And actually there is a real underlying sense of bigotry and prejudice in our society still, and it affects people's lives, and whether that's bigotry of class or of race or of sexuality or of the judgments that we make of other people. It obscures their worth and their opportunity, and it halts that amazing progress that people could make if we were all just making sure that we were a little bit more open to so much more in our lives.
One of my favourite expressions was George W. Bush's "the soft bigotry of low expectations," and something Michael used to talk about, that sense of some people just aren't up for the same opportunities as everyone else.
There
a different
people,
kind of bigotry,
I mean,
but
there are people that you write off because of what they sound like when they open their mouth, or the way in which they present themselves, or where they're from, or what you've heard about them, or all of these other things. And it can happen in a codified way and in a way that we think that we have got beyond as a society, and we've not. And it happens because it's all terribly jolly and we've shut the front door and people are talking about it behind closed doors. And if we could get rid of all of that, then I think that would be a long way forward in absolutely topping whatever it is that Legatum measure, whether we're the best society in the world or not. Yeah.
Michael, you're dictator. Just for a minute.
One thing I'd love to be able to do, but I think it is a fantasy, is two of the biggest problems that our society has is drug abuse and addiction and mental illness, and of course the two are connected. If there was any way in which we could remove the scourge of drugs and cure people from the problems that mental illness brings, then that would be liberating, an invisible blight on the lives of millions gone. The other thing that I'd like if I had a magic wand would be the ability to erase hangovers during party conference season. Because at a stroke, I think I could bring joy and happiness to hundreds.
I think the Labour Party need that one.
Yes.
I'm not sure that's a good right answer, but we'll leave that.
Yes.
Sajid, elevate the conversation.
I wish as a country, we'd built more homes. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face today. It's a natural instinct of everyone to want their own roof over their head, their own place that they can call their home. And we haven't met that challenge as a country yet. We've done a lot, but it's something that's been neglected by successive governments. It's naturally a long-term thing. The things that we're doing now in terms of planning rule changes, help to buy, all the kind of stuff can help, but I still think there's a big challenge out there, and I wish that, like some other countries, had tackled that a lot better than us. I wish we'd done a much better job as a country on that.
Well, that definitely deserves a round of applause. There's a report out tomorrow from Respublica that shows actually the ambition that Margaret Thatcher set for a property-owning democracy. Home ownership is now back at the levels it was in 1985. It soared up until about 2000 and it has fallen back again. So it's a very live issue. Michael Gove, does inequality matter?
Yes.
That was quick. Lots of Conservatives would say it doesn't. As long as you tackle absolute poverty, that you give people the opportunity for work, that you ensure that they have subsistence income, it doesn't matter how much the rich earn.
Well, they're wrong. The first thing is to understand that, or I believe that, in Victorian times, a distinction was drawn by some between deserving and undeserving poor, those who were willing to work and those who were shiftless. I think that it's worth drawing a dividing line between the deserving and the undeserving rich. I think that there are people who genuinely work hard, who are creative, who add value to our society. I think that there are people who play the markets, who sit on each other's remuneration committees, and who rig the rules of the free market in their favour, not in favour of the majority of people in this country or in the world. And unless we challenge them with the same vigour that Teddy Roosevelt did at the turn of the century in America, then we risk losing the creativity of the free market economy, because there are individuals who have rigged the rules to their own advantage. There are occasions much more glitzy than this, if you can imagine such a thing. Like the World Economic Forum at Davos, where the world's uber-rich go to preach to us about our failures, both as politicians and as individuals. But so many of them are people who have had every advantage throughout their lives, and who now have power out of the reach of accountability. And they, in many cases, will preach about the vital importance of competitive markets and freeing up labour markets, and yet they themselves live in a bubble where they find that if they do fail, then they're rewarded handsomely, as so many people, not least in financial services, have been for their failure. So it's critical, first of all, that we recognise that there are some people who have power and wealth who don't deserve it and who need to be challenged. The other thing is, it is not a healthy or a humane society where the gap between rich and poor grows so much. A metaphor that was used by my colleague Greg Clark, but first of all coined by my friend Polly Toynbee, is accurate. And that is that society is like a camel train travelling through the desert. I don't want rigid Stalinist North Korean equality. That would be wrong, inhumane, and would require a coercive power on behalf of the state that would be out of kilter with any decent and humane liberal set of values. But I do believe that when those at the top move far too far away from those at the bottom, that is an unhealthy situation. And organisations from the Royal Navy to the John Lewis Partnership that insist that there's a relationship between those who are paid the least and those who are paid the most in their organisation are healthier organisations for it. And I absolutely believe that if you turn your conception of what a good society is into an atomised meritocratic race in which you simply allow people to roll the dice and to take whatever advantages accrue as a result of that, then what you do is you undermine the bonds that make us human and that raise us above the level of the Darwinian competition that exists in nature. We are better than that. We have souls for a reason. We should be our brother's keepers. We should think that our society is better when our society is more equal, more just and more fair.
Imagine for a moment, Saz, as your business secretary, with a picture of Margaret Thatcher on your wall. What do you think of a Secretary of State for Justice in the Cabinet talking about the failures of capitalism, talking about the need for greater equality, and quoting Polly Toynbee?
Well, it's the last bit it's the last bit that's got me really worried. That's it. But actually, I'd come back to something I said at the start about, and that was capitalism. You see, there's no better system than capitalism for lifting people out of poverty. If there is, I haven't heard of it yet. But I also made the point, and I make it every time when I talk about it, it has its challenges. It doesn't answer all society's problems. But if you accept that capitalism is the best way to lift people's living standards and lift them out of poverty, then you also have to accept it's a system that does produce people that make a lot of money, as well as lifting many others out of poverty. And if those people are people like, if they're Bill Gates or Dyson or someone, they invented something, they worked really hard, or others, then they deserve that money. I don't have a problem with that. And they can have as much of it as they want. But what I would be concerned about in trying to sort of create some sort of utopia or something where everyone's more equal, and if you're trying to do that by trying to bring down the people that are the wealth creators, you will hurt everyone, the very people that you're trying to help. So to me, what matters a lot more is, I guess, equality of opportunity. Let's make sure that we have a society that you can be the son of a bus driver and become a Secretary of State for Business, right? That you can, that you can have nothing and you can become one of the richest men and women in the world. Let's create that opportunity society, and I think it is happening in Britain. We've got a long way to go, but that to me is more important.
Ian or Ruth, would either of you answer the question, does inequality matter, with no?
No.
No, I wouldn't. But I will say one thing, though. It's quite interesting. The first thing I'd say is, in agreeing with Michael, I think the problem here is that nobody, I think, in their right mind, minds somebody who's gone out and risked everything, built a business, spread work, spread jobs, etc., and made, therefore, a big success of their life, and they take the rewards of that. What I think was the real problem in the last few years was that we grew a kind of financial sector that, to some degree, abused its own position. And the problem was that these are the same people that lectured everybody about taking the rough as well as the smooth. You remember, setting up a business, if you don't succeed, then it's hard luck, we're going to take this stuff off you, you didn't pay your money back, it's over. That's what running a business is like. And as soon as they got into trouble during the crash, it was straight back to government will bail you out. So the problem became an excess in a misunderstanding about what real wealth creation is, and wealth creation should be about spreading opportunity, which is exactly what Sajid has just said. It's about the opportunity that people get. And I just want to add one element to that. So there is a coalescence between what they've all said. The one bit is, we've slightly forgotten here that there is a group of people that is often shut out from that process, and I'm talking genuinely about people with disabilities. And the reason why I just raise it right now is because although now we've managed to get more people with disabilities into work, there is still a complete failure amongst many British companies to recognise that actually having someone with disabilities work for you is actually a bonus. It is not a negative. In other words, your company is more cohesive, as we've discovered. People with disabilities work very hard, they're very loyal, and they do an incredible job. And what instead companies think of them as being a problem, they're not. So I would really make a plea here for companies to stop and ask themselves a question: why are we not employing more people with disabilities, mental or physical disabilities? And if we could reach the point where we equalise those employment rates, that is real equality of opportunity, and I'm with Sajid.
In terms of the bigotries you were talking about earlier, bigotry towards disabled people is probably one of the biggest. What's your answer to the inequality question?
The answer to the inequality one is, yes, I think it does matter, and I think that having a camel train that's too far apart frays society and frays communities and sets communities against each other. But the big issue for me that's more important about inequality as the Gini coefficient that's measurable is actually the inequality of opportunity. And we have to recognise, and particularly our party has to recognise, that we don't all start on the starting grid at the same point. And sometimes we're too blithe about saying that if you work hard, you'll get on and you'll do great and blah, blah, blah. And actually, at the moment in our country, you are 35% more likely to be a high earner if you have a low IQ but are from a wealthy family than if you have a high IQ and are from a poorer family. The biggest inequality of opportunity that we have right now is that we don't, it is still how rich your parents are that is a bigger indicator of how well you'll do in life than how smart you are or how hardworking or anything else. And that's something that we have to be better at tackling, because we've all heard it, I'm sure I've said it myself at sometimes, talking about this idea that anybody can go out and do everything and they can be a world beater and they can do all of these things. And actually, do you know what? We don't all have the same advantages to start with, and we as a party have to be better at recognising that, because I think sometimes we're far too blithe about it.
We have Kath Viner here from The Guardian. I hope you're going to go back and tell Polly how much she's loved by us all. Ian, the Pope. Christina Adoni made me ask this question. The Pope said the family was the nearest hospital, the first school, and the best home for the elderly. Is this Conservative government doing enough to help the family?
Well, first of all, that's a statement of fact. It is, at the end of it all, whatever else we define, the key cornerstone and building block to all that happens in society. Now, it's not to say people have difficulties and there are problems, but at the end of it all, we want stability. We want family stability so that people can actually grow through their families and actually go on to achieve things. I talked a little bit about that earlier, about having that sense of self-worth that's derived from being valued within your family, being cared for, and able to see that whoever is looking after you, as your parent, etc., is able to show you the right route, but at the same time gives you that sense that who you are is the value, not what you can give. And I think we have done quite a lot for families. I think the biggest problem we faced, was that everyone has run scared from the subject of family and from, of course, the term marriage, which is part of the process of family. And I think politicians ran scared of this, because if you said anything about families staying together or marriage or anything else, suddenly everyone wants to point the finger, but that means you're against something else. Because you're in favour of something doesn't mean you're against something. We want to support all families that try to bring up their children, look after their relatives, because that's the key. It's about those relationships. So we've done quite a lot so far. I mean, Universal Credit will do a huge amount to levelling that off and supporting them, and the same will go with the marriage tax allowance, which helps with couples who have made that big decision. A lot of support we're putting now towards guidance, marriage guidance and support guidance to couples who may not even be married, etc., all of that is part of the process of trying to help people early on to recognise that it takes a lot to help a family through difficulty. But is there more we can do? Of course there's more we can do. I mean, what the Pope said is a statement of fact, so families should be at the heart of all of our policy. So I've actually been asked by the Prime Minister to head up the search to check that everything that the government does is actually about building families and supporting them, not about taking things away and destroying them. And if we can apply that with all my colleagues here and elsewhere to asking ourselves that simple question, is what we're doing going to help us keep families stable and give them the opportunity to be able to make those big decisions and grow, or is it not? And I think that's going to be the big change in the next 5 years, is that all government secretaries of state, running departments, will want to ask themselves that single question when they come to that moment: are families going to be stronger as a result of what I do? And if the answer is yes, then I think we've started on a real revolution.
Would you agree with Sajid, Ruth, that perhaps the best way we can help the family is to build more homes so that people have somewhere safe and stable to live in?
I think house building is a big part of it. I think also that there are different ways in which we can help families and different types of families that need help. And I think at the kind of extreme end, where there are people that don't have the skills, parenting skills, where there are people that have perhaps issues of mental illness or others who have severe chronic debt issues, who have difficulties in terms of employment, issues in terms of management, of anger management and others, I actually think we have to be much more proactive. We, in this party in particular, hate the idea of state intervention, of nanny statism and all the rest of it. There's a fantastic sort of scheme that runs up in Dundee, which is a city that's not without its problems and its deprivations in Scotland, that I've visited very recently, which does that sort of intensive help, and it physically takes families out of the home that they're in, the situation that they're in. It moves them into accommodation that they have, and it works with them for between 6 months and 2 years, with people in every single day, not just telling them what it is that they should be doing, but showing them what they should be doing. That intervenes in so many different areas, in terms of income, in terms of cooking, in terms of looking after a child, in terms of making sure that they attend areas in which that child can then grow and meet with other children the same age, so at nursery or play school or whatever. And it is transformative, and it is without doubt the most important time to give a child a chance to have a successful adulthood is between the ages of 18 months and 4 years. And we have to not be shy to go in and be able to help in a really overwhelming and comprehensive way for those families that are at that end that really need it, to give them the chance that they need. And I have seen it in action. It is transformative. I would love to see it in every city in the UK, not just in one city in my part of the UK.
Okay. I could ask you two gents a different question. We're a small government party, but we use government. Give me one extra thing the government should be doing to help tackle poverty. Michael, can I start with you?
We should make it easier for businesses to hire, and that may involve providing some form of stick as well as carrot, children and young people who've been in care. Because if we were to look at one group in society who face distinct, in some cases they feel almost insurmountable challenges, it's those children who've grown up in local authority care or who've had multiple placements with foster parents. And I think that ensuring that they're in an environment where they can be trusted and valued and be part of something bigger than themselves is important. And I don't know whether or not the state, I won't presume to design the exact policy tools at the moment. I don't know what it is that the state can do, but we can certainly do more to help people who have been in local authority care make the transition from being a young person at the age of 18 or 21 to being an adult who feels that they can contribute to society and enjoy the dignity that they deserve.
Sajid, how would you expand the state?
That wasn't your question. You said, what more can we do?
Sure.
We can make it even easier for someone to start a business or think about being an entrepreneur. I had a young lady come to my constituency a year ago, and she said, I can't get a job. I'm a graduate, I can't get a job. After chatting for a while, I said to her, what are you good at? And she, basically, cut a long story short, she's good at papier-mâché. I said, I will get you a stall on Bromsgrove Market and you will sell your papier-mâché. She said, I can't do that, it won't work. Anyway, now she's earning a living, she's employed people, has done really well, and we can do a lot more to promote that kind of thing. Can I just come back to your other questions? I've got a,
You like
good
it,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, I've got your, see, my parents are from Asia, and they taught me that family was at the heart of everything. And of course, they're absolutely right, like the Pope. And it just, what you said just reminded me of, I'm not saying they're like the Pope, the same point. What you said reminded me of when I moved to Singapore with my family and my wife, who's here tonight. We were
Laura?
we were looking for a property for our family in the, just to rent in Singapore. And wherever property you went to, so if it was advertised as a 3-bed, you went along, it actually had 4 beds. If you went to a 4-bed, it had 5 beds and so forth. And I asked after a while, I said, why are they like misadvertising almost? And the answer was that that's Auntie's room. And Auntie's room is the room for your parents or your grandparents. And it is actually just assumed that when you get a place, you will have a place for your parents. You will look after your parents. And I think we can do with a bit more of that Asian attitude in Britain.
Absolutely. So build homes, but not just rabbit hutches. Right, the final question, because time is almost out, but I'm going to ask, as a sort of an opportunity to sum up as well why you are Conservatives for social justice, why you are the good right, why you want to defeat poverty. And we'll start with Michael, we'll go along that way and finish with Ian. But what has the Conservatives done in recent times to fight poverty of which you are most proud?
Oh, gosh.
Do you want us to come back to you?
Education?
No.
It's
unfair. It's unfair.
Can't mention home term.
I think changing the position on child protection and adoption, because I think that for a host of reasons, there are biases against intervening. We've talked about the importance of families, I completely agree. But there are biases against intervening in circumstances where you have a child whose biological parents may be living lives of such squalor or whatever, that child is at risk or in danger. And there's a natural bias against rescuing that child from those circumstances. But I actually think that there are times when children do need to be rescued from those circumstances and that they do need to be placed with a family that have the capacity to offer them love and stability and security. And the Prime Minister has led a consistent campaign, and Edward Timpson has been his principal lieutenant in doing so, which has significantly increased the number of children who are taken out of homes where they're at risk, placed for a brief period in local authority care, and more rapidly adopted. And I think that's a fantastic thing.
Brilliant.
I'd say cutting income tax for lowest earners and taking 4 million of them out of income tax altogether.
And is low tax at the heart of your Conservative philosophy for the...
I think it is one of the most conservative things to do, because not just just for the sake of it, but if you think it through, it means that people get to keep more of the money that they earn, and they are much better judge, I think, of deciding how to use that to help themselves and their family than often the state is.
Polly Toynbee, if she was here,
it sounds like she is here. She's been mentioned so much.
Would say 85% of the benefit of continuing to raise the income tax threshold goes to the top 50% of earners. Do you think it's a policy that's exceeded its usefulness from a poverty fighting?
Yeah, well, I'd say there's... First of all, I'd question her numbers. Secondly, I would say that there are many ways to cut the tax burden on low paid, and income tax is just one of them.
Okay. Ruth?
I think it's jobs. I mean, I think we took decisions when we came into office as part of the coalition in 2010, where I think now it's really easy to forget that we had the David Blanchfords of this world telling us we'd be 4 million unemployed. We had George Osborne being pilloried in the press and in papers and on television that should have known better. And we stuck to the course. And there is a reason why our unemployment level is the rate that it is. There's a reason that we have created more jobs in our country, net jobs, than in the rest of the EU put together. There is a reason why our youth unemployment rate for under 25s is less than a third of that of Spain and Greece and other countries. And it's particularly that youth unemployment number. And it's still stubbornly high in comparison to the whole labour market. But if you are not employed between the ages of 18 to 25, you squander the capital that you have as a person, your human capital, later on in life. And we have to continue with our efforts to make sure that young people have positive destinations after school that leads them into employment in the shortest amount of time so that their human capital isn't squandered and that they can have the lives that they deserve for themselves and they will work for and that we should support.
Well, all of those things, really, I suppose, but some more as well. I mean, the point that Ruth is making is very important, which is when I came in, one of the things that we said we would do relentlessly from the beginning was two things. First of all, one is we need to free up the economy to create those jobs. So what Sajid was talking about is absolutely critical as well. So that you actually, if without the job creation, we have a lot of poverty, because without work, the economy doesn't function and people can't, as families, derive their benefits. So the first thing was to relentlessly pursue the policy that lots of people said was wrong, was to actually make the economy work. The second thing is, as businesses then develop the jobs, the important thing is not just jobs, because there had been previously, when the economy had grown, a stock of people who had been left behind. So that in actual fact what ended up with the last Labour government was we were bringing in more and more people in to fill jobs here, but there were British people who were not working. So the second bit is to try and work out how we get more British people who are beyond the labour market back into the labour market, and recognising that work is the way to move themselves as far as they possibly can out of poverty. And so the key bit here has been to structure the rather complex system that we've had to make sure that, first of all, when someone walks into a job centre, they don't see themselves as walking in because they're unemployed. They see themselves as on a journey. So they sign a claimant commitment now. It's like a contract of work. That says what the state will do for you as obligated. This is what we want you to do. Here's what happens if we do it all right. Here's what happens if we don't. Clear from the beginning. Yes, people say it's terrible, the sanctions process, but the whole process is about reward, but it's also about saying to people there is a contract here. And what has happened is we have more people now from social housing in work since records began. There are more people who live in social housing who were left behind who are now back in work. There are fewer children living in households who do not work than since records began. And this is not an accident. And the final thing will be, and I'm going to, the universal credit will deliver an even greater drive and an even greater encouragement to people to work up all the hours and go into full-time work, because I stand by a very simple principle. The best route out of poverty is a job, it's hope, and it's opportunity, and your family and you will benefit not just from poverty for money, but the poverty of ambition will be banished because you believe that you can achieve all that your qualities can allow you to do. That's the route out of poverty.
Well, that's a stirring note to end on. Can I thank our panellists very, very much. They've all been incredibly frank, I think, with us.